Hello. Today we are going to start with passive voice. First of all, it is said that verbs have voice. Verbs have active voice and they also have passive voice. So, what is the difference between active and passive? Of course, structure. That's the first thing that you're going to see. But actually, the difference between active and passive is the focus, right? The focus is different. In meaning, they are actually very similar. They have very similar meanings, but the focus is different. So, actually, here we have active voice focuses on the subject, which is the performer of the action, and passive voice focuses on the object, which is the receiver of the action. That's the difference, the focus. The focus in active is on the subject, the focus in passive is the object. Now, before we continue with passive voice, we need to pause and review transitive verbs, subjects and objects, subject pronouns, and object pronouns. These are things you have to know to work with passive. Of course, working with tenses is also very important. You need to know and identify simple present, present continuous, all the tenses. We will discuss this later on. Now, let's talk about transitive verbs. First of all, we know that verbs have active voice and passive voice. We already discussed that before, but we can also categorize verbs in another way. We can categorize verbs as transitive and intransitive. All right, so what is the difference? Transitive verbs take one object or two objects. They can take an object. They need an object to complete an idea in a sentence. On the other hand, intransitive verbs do not take an object. For example, here we have a list of transitive verbs and intransitive verbs. Okay, we have make, give, throw, use, celebrate, enjoy, sell, produce, send, find. These are transitive verbs. Intransitive verbs are some like jump, run, sing, knock, sleep, laugh, live, smile, clap, occur. You can find lists on Google if you would like. Actually, we have a longer list coming up. And one way for you to realize which is transitive and which is intransitive, usually when you have a transitive verb and you don't have an object, it sounds incomplete. For example, if you say, I saw Pedro. Okay, great. I saw Pedro. But what happens if I say I saw? You saw what? You saw who, right? So it's not clear, it's not complete. That's because C is transitive. It needs an object. Here we have some examples, okay? Leah runs in the morning. In this situation, okay, we know, well, from the list, we know that run is intransitive, and actually you can see it because you don't have an object after runs. You actually have a prepositional phrase, which is in the morning. But the other three sentences, we have Pia found Lisa's blouse. Gary will send the homework. My mother gave cocachos, right? So we have the subjects, we have the verb, and then we have in the first sentence a prepositional phrase, and then on the other ones we have objects. So you will see that we have subjects, verb, and objects. And this is what you will have. This is the structure that you will have when you have transitive verbs. Okay? Because you will have a subject and you need an object after the verb to complete the meaning. Because if I only say Pia found, you're going to say Pia found what? Pia found who, when, where, right? We don't know. But if I say Pia found Luisa's blouse, we know the object is blouse. If I say Gary will send what? Gary will send who, right? The homework, okay. My mother gave. She gave what, right? Empanadas? No, 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 no. She gave cocachos. So that's the difference. Let's continue with the whole idea of these sentences where we have subjects, verbs. In the first situation, we have a prepositional phrase to see the difference between an intransitive verb and the other one's transitive verbs, okay? Which is the object. These verbs are very important when we are talking about passive voice. So, and also, there is something that you have to remember, that we have subject pronouns and object pronouns. This is the reason we have two different types of pronouns. The subject pronouns go in the subject position. If you want to replace Leah, for example, you will replace it for she. If you have to replace Pia, you will replace it for she. Gary, he. My mother, she. In the morning is a prepositional phrase, so it doesn't fit with what we are talking about. But right here, if I say Luisa's blouse, Luisa's blouse can be replaced. In this case, the object is blouse. So you will need to use an object pronoun, which is it. The homework, it. Cocachos, them, right? Subject pronouns, I, you, he, she, it, we, you, they. They're used in the subject. Object pronouns, right? We have me, you, him, her, us, them, it. So these go in the object position after the transitive verbs. Okay, so it's important that you understand and know and remember subject pronouns in the subject position, object pronouns after transitive verbs in the object position, right? Here we have a longer list of transitive verbs. So why are transitive verbs important right now that we are reviewing passive? Well, you need to have a transitive verb to have passive voice. You need to have a transitive verb, okay? Because a transitive verb means that you will have an object. So let's continue talking about passive voice now. Now that you saw transitive verbs, that you saw subjects and objects, subject pronouns and object pronouns. Now remember, we have active voice and passive voice. The difference is the focus. The meaning is pretty similar. We are still reviewing active and passive. Active focuses on the subject. Passive focuses on the receiver. Now, here we have some examples of active and passive. Many teenagers use cell phones to play games. We have use, which is a transitive verb. So in this case, to form a passive voice, you will need to make the subject of active the agent. It's not the object. It becomes the agent in passive. And actually, the object in active becomes the subject of passive. Because remember, in passive voice, okay, in passive voice, what we do is we focus on the object, subject, verb, object. So if we are focusing in passive voice, we are focusing on the object. We want to focus on this, then this will need to come here as the subject. And of course, the verb needs to change because it's passive. And then the subject of active becomes the agent. Remember, is the agent. and is usually introduced with a by phrase. All right, so the sentence will become many teenagers use cell phones to play games. Cell phones are used by many teenagers to play games. This is how we form passive. So in passive voice, the action is more important. In passive voice, the person who does the action is unknown, can be unknown, or maybe you don't want to mention it. In passive, the person who does the action is obvious. Okay, so all of these things can be true in passive voice. The truth is that in passive voice, the object, the receiver, is what we focus on. So here, engineers tests new designs. So Lara made majadito for everyone. Gary is sending the information. So what will happen in passive? The object will become the subject. The verbs will change. And the subjects in active will become the agents in passive. Okay, so we will have, for example, new designs are tested by engineers. Also, the majadito was made by Lara. The information is being sent by Gary. So this is what we have in passive. We will look at structure right now. I just want you to see the idea of what we do in passive. Why passive is different than active. Why? We focus more on the receiver, right? The action is important, not the performer or the subject. So, you can actually have passive voice in any tense. All you need is a transitive verb and an object. And obviously, you will have an object because you have a transitive verb. So, it is mandatory that you learn about transitive verbs so you can learn passive. So here we have a list of some transitive verbs that you will be using in your unit. And let's see, we have simple present active voice. Because remember what I said before, you can have passive voice in different tenses. You just need to have a transitive verb because this allows you to have an object, right? So, simple present active voice, simple present passive voice. Simple present active voice. Tracy sells almond milk in the market. Kim and Ben celebrate Christmas. This is simple present. Tracy sells, third person. Kim and Ben celebrate. So, what will happen in passive? The object becomes the subject. The verb change. The verbs change. Actually, in passive voice, let's say like the main structure would be in a past participle. That's the main structure. But guys, in this situation, be needs to change. How will it change? Be will change depending on the tense because it needs to reflect the tense. For example, if I ask you, what is the present of be? What would you say? The present of be is are. So that's the structure for simple present passive voice. Simple present passive voice is is, are, and a past participle. Almond milk is sold by Tracy in the market. Is sold. Christmas is celebrated by Kim and Ben. And students, you should not be confused by simple present passive voice. Because if you go back and think about the grammar, the structures that we have seen, there is no structure that has is and a past participle. We have, for example, is and a present participle, and that is present continuous, right? Almond milk is selling, but that wouldn't make sense. Then we will have to say Tracy is selling almond milk. And that's a situation that maybe is happening right now because it will be present continuous. But what I am trying to actually focus on is that you should not get confused. That's why I mentioned before that you need to know the tenses. Because when you see sells, this is simple present. And when you see is sold by, you have to know this is passive voice. So you shouldn't get confused. Christmas is celebrated. Is celebrated. Okay? There is no way, students, that you should get confused. Oh, is celebrated. We have auxiliary is, and we have celebrated. Present continuous. No. Okay, present perfect. No, we have is, not have or has. So guys, there should be no reason why we should get confused. We need to know the tenses. We need to know simple present. We need to know simple past. And if you're certain about what you know, when you see sells, you will know that simple present. When you see is sold, wait a minute, I'm going to see the sentence. Almond milk is sold by, oh, this is simple present passive voice. That's what you have to know and remember. So, same thing. Again, we are continuing with the transitive verbs. But remember, I said you can have passive voice in any tense. What do you need? A transitive verb. So, Larissa sold the red dress yesterday. Tony and I broke the TV. Simple past, right? Sold and broke. What happens in passive voice? Remember, I told you the main structure for passive voice is be and a past participle. But I also told you that you need to, even though you have be, this needs to reflect the tense. So this needs to reflect simple past. So what is the past of be? Was and were, right? So that's the structure for simple past passive voice. The structure would be was or were in a past participle. So instead of saying Larissa sold the red dress yesterday, we would say the red dress was sold by Larissa. And why do I use was? Because it's dress, and dress, the subject pronoun for dress is it. What happens if the word was dresses? The red dresses were sold. Because it's plural, right? So another one. Tony and I broke the TV. The TV was broken by us. Maybe this by us is not as important, but hey, we can mention it. But right here in passive voice, I am focusing on this part. I am focusing on the red dress, and I am focusing on the TV. And was sold was broken. And again, there is no structure that looks like this. If you say, okay, was and then sold, maybe was selling, that will be past continuous. But hey, it was sold. So guys, there should be no confusion. You need to be sure of what you know, and you know simple present, you know simple past, you know future, you know present continuous. So guys, now that we know that, we are continuing with passive voice, and this is another structure, but it is the same. It's simple past. It's only like another perspective. And finally, we can have also future active voice. and future passive voice. Active voice, my mother will give us permission to take empanadas, to make empanadas. We will enjoy this cake. Yum, yum. So again, if I say passive voice, when you say passive voice, you remember be in a past participle, but be needs to reflect future. So here we're using a modal, right? So the structure for future passive voice would be will, be, and a past participle of the main verb in active voice. My mother will give us permission. Okay, so we can change it. Permission to make empanadas will be given. Will be past participle of give, given. We will enjoy this cake. This cake will be enjoyed. Now, in passive voice, it's not always important or necessary to mention the receiver, to mention the agent. When you say bye Pedro, bye, when you use a bye phrase, it's not always important. But sometimes if you want to mention it, there are certain rules when you mention it and when you don't. But right now, let's just focus on learning passive voice.